Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So if you're not already, follow us on Instagram and Twitter for all our latest posts, and consider supporting us on Patreon. We're almost at 20 patrons, and when we hit 20 patrons, I think we're going to do something a little special. Anyways, on to today's main topic. So, I was riding line 1 today, and I noticed a poster for Nuit Blanche. Now, I could make a whole other video about Nuit Blanche and how cool it is and all the interesting stuff that I've seen over the years, but it reminded me of something that I've been thinking about in the past, but that hadn't come to my mind recently. 24-hour service on the subway. Now, as some of you might know, but many of you may not know, the TTC actually operates for 24 hours per day for a couple days a year. Nuit Blanche is a typical event where they do it, and they also do it during New Year's Eve, I believe, usually. Now, with that said, why am I bringing this up? Well, given the fact that ATC is progressing nicely on line 1, I think that 24-hour service, especially on young, is something that we really should look into. Now, you might say, oh, there's no real precedent. A lot of people, when they think of 24-hour subway service, they instantly think of New York, and the kind of common logic that people go through with New York is that, oh, they can operate 24-hour service because they've got 4 tracks, they can kind of shift the trains around. We don't have 4 tracks, so we can't operate 24-hour service. But that's not actually true. In London, several of their subway lines, the Tube, the Underground, operate 24 hours per day on Fridays and Saturdays. Now, I definitely get the justification for only having a weekend, basically Friday and Saturday, 24-hour service. I think that it's a happy medium between getting the time for maintenance and being able to do 24-hour service on kind of the nights where it's going to be most critical. It's also worth noting that some cities are already closer to that than we are. For example, in Ottawa, they chose to basically have the new O-train line that we've visited recently close a little bit earlier on weeknights so that it can operate later until 2 a.m. on Friday and Saturday nights. This is definitely a great step, but I think that, especially in Toronto, where the demand is probably there and there's a night economy that we could definitely invest in, I think going for 24-hour service is something that we should seriously consider, especially when ATC is fully deployed. Of course, that's probably at least a year out from now, if not more, given the delays we've seen in the past, but it's definitely worth thinking what such a service would look like, and is it really possible? Why is it possible? Well, the thing that creates an issue when you're operating 24 hours is there's, of course, a need for maintenance. Typically on subway systems, maintenance happens on a nightly basis, and the line is fully shut down, and that gives the system an opportunity to be, fully turned off and have workers go in and do repairs and the like. So how does a 24/7 service work on any days? Well, as we've seen in Toronto, it's definitely not impossible since we do it a few nights per year. We just need to do it 25 times more times per year, and we'll have the 2-day-a-week 24-hour service that a city like London has. Now, of course, as I mentioned, it has to do with ATC, which means that the Bloor-Danforth line is totally out of the question. I also would argue that the Spadina line is out of the question, given that it doesn't really have necessarily the demand, in my eyes, for this kind of service, and I think having a single north-south heavy rail line operating is a good starting point. It's important to note that we do already have several streetcar routes operating 24 hours, so there is some precedence for this. I think a line from Union to Finch is the great starting point for subway service. I also think frequency does not need to be very high. Every 30 minutes in the middle of the night is definitely sufficient, though going down to something like a 15-minute service would be ideal. So, back to ATC. Why is it so important? So, the way the subway system currently works, trains pretty much have to operate on 1 track going northbound and 1 track going southbound. Now, why is this an issue for 24-hour service? Well, one of the things you can kind of imagine is if you had to repair a certain section of track, what you could do is you could just have trains share 1 section of track for 1 section, and then go back to the other track once they'd passed the section being repaired. This shouldn't be a big issue because in the middle of the night, trains aren't operating that often, so trains can alternate. 1 goes north, 1 comes through south, and then another 1 goes north. The thing is, though, this isn't really feasible with the current system. Why? Because signals are all pointing in one direction. That's because the way the system was designed, trains always we're going to be going up in one track and coming down on another. There's also the consideration that there are not necessarily enough crossovers, but I think we could make it work. In the case of London, I believe what they've kind of done is they have ended service a little bit earlier on those weekday nights and really packed the maintenance on those nights. They've been really efficient with the time and such, and that means that they can take 2 nights off of maintenance. It is also possible, as I mentioned, to have critical maintenance go on. You just have to single track through certain sections. Now this is where ATC comes in. Once you have ATC operating, signals are pretty much completely irrelevant. I believe they do exist as kind of a redundancy, but they're not used. In fact, if you look at the Spadina line, the old signal posts are basically covered up. Now, when you think of how ATC works, it's essentially a virtual signaling system. The signaling is all done digitally, and the driver doesn't have to see any wayside equipment. What this means is that if Control decides, tonight we're going to do maintenance on the section from Lawrence to St. Clair, what can happen is we shut down the track on one side, and we have trains automatically route through the single track. Since ATC would be operating, you don't have to worry about the fact that some drivers wouldn't be able to see signal posts because they'd be pointing in the same direction as the train. This means that you could route all the trains through the single track section. Of course, having the automated train control also means that the timings can be perfect, such that trains come out of the single track and another one goes north through it. So, with all that said, I'd really like to know what you guys think. Some of the justifications I think for having this nighttime subway service, especially on Yonge, is that Yonge is really our most critical corridor. I think that over the years we need to consider how to further kind of densify and upgrade the Yonge Street subway and the buses along Yonge. As I mentioned in a previous video, I still think Line 1 matters a lot because Yonge matters. Yonge is seriously the most significant street in all of Toronto, and probably the most significant street in the entire country, if not potentially one of the most significant ones on the continent. That's because so much of Toronto's development has been located along Yonge for literally over a century. At this point, there's so many different employment hubs that having 24-hour service just makes a lot of sense. It means that there's a big potential boost to the economy along Yonge, and it also means that the literally hundreds of thousands of people that live nearby to Yonge Street have another commuting option. This makes even more sense when you consider the Yonge line will be extended to Richmond Hill Centre in the future, and then you would have connectivity all the way up Yonge Street in the not too distant future once the Richmond Hill extension is completed. Anyways though, I'd like to know what you guys think. What routes do you think should operate 24 hours? Now, of course, during Nuit Blanche, Line 2 and Line 3 also operate 24 hours, and I believe in the past Line 4 has as well, though the demand isn't really there, so I think that's something that they don't really do anymore. Anyways though guys, again, what routes do you think should be 24 hours? What cities do you think do 24-hour transit well? And what do you think of all these ideas? I'd like to hear down in the comments below. As always, thank you for watching and have a nice night.